The mind must be trained, not followed. This is a simple idea, yet most people spend their entire lives doing the opposite. A thought appears, and they move with it. A feeling rises, and they surrender to it. Over time, the mind becomes loud, impatient, and scattered, not because it is broken, but because it has never been taught discipline. An untrained mind behaves like an unguarded gate, allowing anything to enter and take control. Following the mind feels natural because it is easy. Training the mind feels uncomfortable because it requires awareness and restraint. The mind seeks pleasure, avoidance, and constant stimulation. It prefers comfort over growth and excuses over effort. When you follow it without question, it slowly weakens your ability to choose. You begin reacting instead of deciding. Life starts happening to you instead of being shaped by you. Training the mind does not mean suppressing thoughts or fighting emotions. Suppression creates tension, and tension leads to imbalance. Training means observation without attachment. It means noticing a thought without immediately obeying it. A trained mind can witness anger without acting in anger, desire without chasing it, fear without running from it. This space between impulse and action is where strength lives. At first, the mind resists training. It becomes restless when asked to be still. It becomes irritated when denied distraction. This resistance is not a sign to stop. It is evidence that control is shifting. Just as muscles shake under new weight, the mind reacts when it is no longer in charge. Many people mistake this discomfort for failure and return to old habits, reinforcing the illusion that the mind cannot be changed. The truth is that the mind learns through repetition. What you repeatedly allow becomes your default state. If you repeatedly follow distraction, distraction becomes your nature. If you repeatedly return to awareness, awareness becomes your ground. Training the mind is not achieved in moments of inspiration, but in ordinary, unremarkable moments where discipline is chosen over impulse. Silence is one of the most direct forms of mental training. In silence, the mind reveals its patterns. It jumps, complains, negotiates, and creates noise to avoid stillness. When you do not chase this noise, it slowly loses its power. The mind realizes it is being watched, and watched behavior changes. This is not force, this is clarity. Breathe is another tool of training. When the breath is steady, the mind follows. When the breath is chaotic, the mind mirrors it. By returning attention to the breath, you give the mind an anchor. This simple act interrupts automatic reactions and restores presence. Over time, this practice conditions the mind to return to balance instead of escalation. Training the mind also means choosing difficulty on purpose. Voluntary discomfort teaches the mind that it does not control your actions. Cold, fatigue, effort, and patience all expose the mind's tendency to complain and avoid. When you continue calmly despite this resistance, the mind learns obedience, not submission, but cooperation. A trained mind does not eliminate thoughts. It reduces their authority. Thoughts still arise, but they no longer dictate behavior. Emotional waves still pass through, but they no longer knock you off balance. This creates stability that is not dependent on external conditions. Without training, the mind becomes a source of suffering. With training, it becomes a tool. The same mind that once distracted and weakened, you begins to support focus, resilience, and clarity. Control is not gained through domination, but through consistent guidance, where awareness leads and the mind follows again and again. In every moment where a choice is possible, discipline creates mental clarity, because clarity does not appear by accident. A clear mind is built through structure, repetition, and intentional limits. Without discipline, the mind drifts toward excess stimulation, scattered attention, and emotional noise. It becomes crowded with unfinished thoughts, reactive emotions, and constant internal commentary. Discipline reduces this noise by narrowing focus and removing what is unnecessary. Many people misunderstand discipline as punishment or restriction. In reality, discipline is alignment. It is the decision to direct energy instead of allowing it to leak in every direction. When actions follow a consistent rhythm, the mind stops negotiating. It no longer asks what to do next, because the path is already defined. This reduces mental friction and frees attention for what actually matters. Mental confusion often comes from too many choices and too little structure. Each decision, no matter how small, consumes energy. Discipline removes trivial decisions by turning them into habits. When habits are established, the mind conserves strength. This conserved strength becomes clarity. You think less, but you see more. Discipline also stabilizes emotions. An undisciplined mind reacts to every external change. Praise creates excitement, criticism creates anger, discomfort creates avoidance. With discipline, reactions slow down. There is space between stimulus and response. This space allows awareness to intervene before emotion takes control. Over time, emotional patterns soften because they are no longer reinforced through impulsive action. Consistency is more important than intensity. Small disciplined actions, repeated daily, shape the mind more effectively than rare moments of extreme effort. When the mind knows that effort will be applied regardless of mood, it stops resisting. Resistance exists because the mind believes avoidance is still an option. Discipline removes that option, and with it, internal conflict decreases. Clarity also comes from limitation. A disciplined mind accepts boundaries. It understands that focus requires exclusion. You cannot see clearly while looking everywhere at once. Discipline chooses where attention goes and where it does not. This deliberate narrowing sharpens perception and deepens understanding. Physical discipline supports mental clarity. The body and mind are not separate systems. When the body is neglected, the mind becomes unstable. Regular movement, controlled breathing, and regulated rest create a foundation for mental steadiness. A disciplined body sends signals of order to the mind. The mind responds by organizing itself. Discipline teaches patience. Without patience, the mind demands immediate results and becomes frustrated when progress is slow. Patience allows clarity to develop gradually. It removes urgency and replaces it with trust in the process. When urgency disappears, the mind stops rushing and begins to observe. Another effect of discipline is honesty. A disciplined routine exposes excuses. When actions are scheduled and commitments are clear, avoidance becomes visible. This visibility forces self-awareness. You begin to see how often the mind attempts to escape effort. Seeing this clearly weakens its influence. Discipline also reduces mental clutter by filtering input. Not every thought deserves attention. Not every emotion deserves expression. Discipline decides what is acted upon and what is allowed to pass. This filtering prevents overload and preserves clarity under pressure. Over time, discipline builds confidence in one's ability to remain steady. This confidence quiets anxiety. When the mind trusts that structure will hold, it stops constantly preparing for collapse. Worry fades when predictability replaces chaos. Clarity is not a sudden insight. It is the result of order sustained over time. Each disciplined choice reinforces the next. The mind begins to reflect the structure imposed upon it. Thoughts become simpler, emotions become quieter, attention becomes sharper. What once felt overwhelming becomes manageable, not because life became easier, but because the mind learned how to remain clear within its resistance is part of growth, not an obstacle to it. Whenever you attempt to change your behavior, your habits, or your resistance appears. It shows up as discomfort, doubt, laziness, frustration, or the urge to quit. Many people interpret this resistance as a sign that something is wrong But in reality, it is a signal that something is being challenged. Growth begins the moment comfort is disturbed. The mind is designed to preserve what is familiar. Familiarity feels safe, even when it is limiting. When you introduce new discipline, new effort, or new awareness, the mind reacts defensively. It tries to pull you back toward old patterns because they require less energy. This reaction is automatic and impersonal. It is not a flaw in character, but a natural function of the mind. Resistance often feels strongest at the beginning. The first moments of stillness feel unbearable. The first days of discipline feel heavy. The first attempts at focus feel scattered. This early resistance is not a verdict on your ability. It is simply the mind testing whether the change is temporary or permanent. When consistency is applied, resistance begins to weaken. Physical training offers a clear example. Muscles resist unfamiliar movement. They burn, tighten, and protest. This discomfort does not mean damage. It means adaptation is underway. The same principle applies to mental training. When the mind feels strained, restless, or uncomfortable, it is being stretched beyond its current capacity. Avoiding resistance keeps you exactly where you are. Each time discomfort is escaped, the mind learns that resistance works. It strengthens the habit of avoidance and weakens resilience. Over time, even small challenges feel overwhelming because the mind has not been conditioned to stay present under pressure. Staying with resistance builds tolerance. Not tolerance in the sense of endurance alone, but tolerance of internal experience. You learn that discomfort can exist without controlling your actions. You discover that urges rise and fall on their own when they are not obeyed. This realization reduces fear, because fear often comes from the belief that discomfort will last forever. Resistance also exposes attachment. What you resist most often reveals what you cling to most strongly. The desire for ease, approval, certainty, or control becomes visible when it is threatened. Seeing these attachments clearly creates an opportunity to loosen them. Growth does not require removing attachment completely, but it does require seeing how it influences behavior. There is also a rhythm to resistance. It comes in waves. When you push forward, resistance increases. When you remain steady, it peaks. When you persist, it breaks. Many people quit at the peak, mistaking intensity for permanence. Understanding this cycle changes how resistance is experienced. Instead of reacting to it, you allow it to pass. Resistance sharpens awareness. When everything is easy, attention drifts. Difficulty demands presence. It forces you into the moment. In this way, resistance becomes a teacher. It shows you where your limits are and invites you to expand them. Mental growth is not measured by comfort, but by capacity. Capacity to stay focused, to remain calm, to continue with clarity under strain. Resistance is the environment in which this capacity is built. Without it, there is no pressure, and without pressure, there is no strengthening. Over time, your relationship with resistance changes. It stops feeling like an enemy and starts feeling like a signal. A signal that you are no longer stagnant. A signal that effort is being applied in the right place. The mind learns that resistance is not something to escape, but something to move through, steadily. Without drama, without negotiation, and without retreat, you are the observer, not the thought. This distinction changes everything once it is understood through experience rather than words. Most people live as if every thought they have is a command or a truth. A thought appears and immediately becomes identity, belief, or action. This creates a life driven by internal noise instead of conscious choice. Thoughts arise automatically. They are shaped by memory, habit, fear, desire, and conditioning. You do not choose most of them. If you listen closely, you will notice that thoughts appear before you decide to think them. This alone reveals that thoughts are events, not ownership. What appears cannot be what you are. The observer is the awareness that notices a thought without becoming it. When a thought says, I am not enough, awareness hears it. When a thought says, I must react, awareness sees it. The observer does not argue with the thought and does not follow it. It simply recognizes its presence. This recognition breaks identification. At first, observing feels weak because it does not provide immediate relief. Acting on thoughts feels powerful because it releases tension quickly. But this release is temporary. It strengthens the habit of reactivity. Observation, on the other hand, builds long-term stability. It allows thoughts to pass without creating consequences. When observation is practiced consistently, patterns become visible. You begin to see the same thoughts repeating in different situations, the same fears, the same narratives, the same emotional triggers. This repetition reveals that thoughts are not personalized truths, but conditioned loops. Seeing the loop reduces its influence. The observer does not try to stop thinking. Stopping thought creates conflict. Conflict strengthens the mind's activity. Observation allows thoughts to exhaust themselves. When a thought is not fed by belief or action, it loses energy. Over time, the mind becomes quieter, not because it is forced, but because it is no longer entertained. Emotions also change when observation is present. Emotions are often fueled by thoughts. When thoughts are seen rather than followed, emotions soften. Anger arises, but without the story that justifies it, it fades. Fear arises, but without catastrophic interpretation, it passes. Observation does not eliminate emotion, but it prevents escalation. The observer creates space. In that space, choice exists. Without observation, there is only impulse. With observation, response becomes possible. This space may be brief at first, but it expands with practice. Even a single moment of awareness can prevent years of regret. The observer is always present, but rarely recognized. It is active when you notice your breath, when you realize you are distracted, when you catch yourself mid-reaction. Each of these moments is evidence of awareness. Training the mind is learning to return to this position repeatedly. Identification with thought creates suffering because thoughts are unstable. They change constantly. When identity is built on something that shifts, anxiety is inevitable. Observation anchors identity in awareness, which remains constant regardless of mental content. Observation also brings humility. You see how little control you have over what appears in the mind. This reduces pride and self-judgment. You stop blaming yourself for thoughts and start taking responsibility for actions instead. Living as the observer does not make you passive. It makes you precise. Action comes from clarity instead of compulsion. Speech becomes intentional. Decisions become aligned rather than reactive. The more you rest in observation, the less power thoughts have to disturb your balance. They still appear, but they no longer define you. You remain present while the mind moves. Awareness stays steady while thoughts rise and fall. Like weather passing through an open sky calm is true strength because it is stability under pressure, not the absence of pressure. Anyone can remain composed when conditions are favorable. Real strength appears when difficulty arises and the inner state remains steady. Calm is not weakness, passivity, or avoidance. It is control without force, presence without tension. An untrained mind reacts quickly. Reaction feels powerful, but it is fragile. It depends on external conditions and emotional momentum. When challenged, it escalates. When threatened, it collapses. Calm, by contrast, does not depend on circumstances. It is generated internally and maintained through awareness and discipline. Calm allows perception to remain clear. When emotions surge, perception narrows. The mind focuses only on threat, insult, or discomfort. This tunnel vision leads to poor decisions. Calm keeps perception wide. It allows you to see options, consequences, and timing. This clarity is a form of strength that cannot be matched by aggression. Strength is often confused with dominance. Loudness, speed, and intensity are mistaken for power. But these expressions usually hide insecurity and lack of control. Calm requires confidence. It requires the ability to remain present without proving anything. This self-possession is rare because it cannot be faked. Calm is built through exposure to difficulty without escape. Each time you stay present in discomfort without reacting, calm deepens. Each time you breathe instead of escalating, control strengthens. This training is subtle but cumulative. Over time, the nervous system learns that it does not need to panic to survive. Breath plays a central role in cultivating calm. Shallow, rapid breathing signals danger to the body. Slow, steady breathing signals safety. By regulating breath, you regulate emotional intensity. This does not remove the challenge, but it changes your relationship to it. You remain grounded while the situation unfolds. Calm also protects energy. Emotional reactions consume strength without producing results. Anger drains. Anxiety exhausts. Impatience scatters focus. Calm conserves energy by preventing unnecessary expenditure. This conservation allows endurance. Endurance is a form of strength that outlasts force. In conflict, calm creates advantage. When one mind is agitated and the other is stable, the stable one sees clearly. Calm does not rush, it listens, it observes. This often diffuses tension or exposes weakness without confrontation. Calm does not need to dominate to be effective. Calm also supports resilience. Setbacks are inevitable. Without calm, setbacks feel personal and overwhelming. With calm, they are processed as information. This shift allows learning instead of collapse. The mind remains flexible instead of defensive. There is also moral strength in calm. When emotions drive action, values are easily compromised. Calm allows alignment between principles and behavior. You act according to what is right, not what feels urgent. This integrity strengthens self-trust. Calm does not mean indifference. It allows full engagement without losing balance. You can care deeply and still remain composed. You can feel intensity without being controlled by it. This balance is difficult to achieve, which is why calm is rare. Training calm requires patience. The mind will resist slowing down. It equates speed with safety. This belief must be retrained through repetition. Each deliberate pause rewires the nervous system. Each measured response reinforces control. Over time, calm becomes a baseline rather than an effort. Challenges still arise, but they no longer dictate internal state. The body stays relaxed, the mind stays clear, action remains intentional. Calm becomes strength, not because it overpowers others, but because it prevents you from being overpowered by yourself daily. Practice leads to freedom, because freedom is not a single achievement, but a condition built through repetition. Most people associate freedom with absence of obligation, but the absence of structure often creates dependence on impulse, mood, and circumstance. True freedom is the ability to choose your response regardless of internal or external pressure, and this ability is cultivated through daily practice. Practice creates familiarity. What is repeated becomes natural. When awareness, discipline, and restraint are practiced daily, they stop feeling forced. The mind learns new defaults. Without daily practice, insight remains theoretical. Understanding alone does not change behavior. Only repeated application reshapes the nervous system and the patterns of the mind. Daily practice removes reliance on motivation. Motivation is unstable and unpredictable. If progress depends on feeling ready or inspired, consistency collapses. Practice continues regardless of mood. This consistency teaches the mind that action is not conditional. Over time, resistance weakens because negotiation is no longer effective. Freedom also requires reliability. A mind that changes direction constantly cannot be free because it is always reacting. Daily practice establishes rhythm. Rhythm creates predictability. Predictability creates stability. When the mind knows what to expect, it relaxes. Relaxation reduces internal conflict, allowing clearer choice. Practice is not about intensity. It is about continuity. Small actions performed daily accumulate more power than rare extreme efforts. Each repetition reinforces neural pathways. Each return to awareness strengthens control. Even brief practices, when consistent, produce lasting change. Daily practice also exposes patterns that would otherwise remain hidden. When you observe the mind at the same time each day, you begin to notice recurring distractions, excuses, and emotional states. This visibility brings honesty. You cannot escape yourself when you meet yourself regularly. Awareness grows through familiarity. Freedom from emotional reactivity is built gradually. Each day you pause instead of reacting, you loosen the grip of impulse. Each day you remain present through discomfort. You expand capacity. These small moments of restraint accumulate into resilience. Practice also builds trust in yourself. When you keep commitments, even small ones, self-respect grows. This trust reduces anxiety. A mind that trusts itself does not constantly worry about failure or collapse. Confidence grounded in action is stable because it is earned, not imagined. Daily practice simplifies life. When practice becomes part of routine, decision-making decreases. There is less debate, less delay, less self-conflict. This simplicity creates mental space. Space allows reflection. Reflection allows wisdom to develop. Freedom is often misunderstood as doing whatever you want. In reality, doing whatever you want often means being controlled by desire. Daily practice weakens this control by introducing restraint. Restraint is not denial, it is choice. When you can choose not to act on every impulse, freedom increases. Practice also builds tolerance for stillness. Many people fear stillness because it reveals discomfort and unresolved tension. Daily exposure to stillness reduces this fear. What was once avoided becomes familiar. Familiarity dissolves fear. Over time, daily practice changes identity. You stop seeing yourself as someone who tries and start seeing yourself as someone who practices. This shift removes pressure and replaces it with process. The mind no longer demands results, it focuses on participation. Freedom emerges quietly. There is no dramatic moment. There is simply less struggle. Fewer compulsions, more space between urge and action, more clarity in decision-making. Daily practice does not add freedom to your life. It removes the habits that prevent it. The truth revealed through this understanding is not mysterious or distant. It is practical, demanding, and available in every moment. The mind does not need to be defeated, silenced, or escaped. It needs direction. When trained with discipline, patience, and awareness, it becomes a powerful ally instead of a source of conflict. Resistance stops being something to fear and becomes a signal of progress. Thoughts lose their authority when they are observed rather than obeyed. Calm replaces reactivity, not because life becomes easier, but because control is reclaimed from within. Daily practice turns effort into habit and habit into freedom, slowly reshaping how challenges are met and how choices are made. This path does not promise comfort or constant peace. It offers something stronger: stability, clarity, and self-mastery. When the mind is guided instead of followed, life is no longer driven by impulse or circumstance. It becomes intentional, grounded, and resilient, shaped from the inside outward, moment by moment, through conscious training and steady awareness.